Brendan Boylan here with the Saints News Network on SI.com. I'm here with some of our interns. We're doing something a little bit different. Obviously, we had the writers just a couple days ago, and we talked about the NFL draft and gave our 2021 NFL draft preview. We wanted to shine the spotlight on some guys that don't typically get it, right? Our interns that do so much great work for us in the background, whether that's creating our graphics for the art, whether that's helping out with some articles and doing some background research. And of course, all these draft profile videos that you guys have been seeing. Two of the three guys that are behind that are with us today. We have Andrew and Sam. Joe, our third intern, unable to join us this evening. But man, these guys do the stuff behind the scenes. We're going to call these guys the offensive linemen of our team. They do all the dirty work, but man, sometimes they don't get the recognition they need, so we're trying to give that to them today. Hello, Jerry. Thanks for joining us this evening. Guys, listen, I want to give you guys the floor to tell all of our family here with the Saints News Network, fans, family, readers, who you guys are, what you guys are doing. One of you in college, one of you guys is just out of college. So starting with Sam, introduce yourself to the people. Where did you graduate from? What are you doing? What are you looking to do? And what have you loved about your internship with us thus far?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Sam. I graduated from Loyola University here in New Orleans last May. Since then, I've been interning with Saints News Network, covering the hometown team and helping out, writing some articles, making videos and art. It's just been a good year so far, covering the Saints last year.
And Andrew.
So, hi guys, I'm Andrew. You may know me from the Who Dat Discussion, who is another podcast that I host. I'll be doing a podcast right after this on the draft as well, and hopefully that should be out in the morning. And just love talking about this team. Love, writing about this team, doing the videos, and Saints News Network's been really fun. I mean, I know 2020 didn't end the way Saints fans wanted to, but it was just a really ton of fun to get closer to this team with Saints News Network. And right now I'm in college up in New York at Fordham, if any of you guys know, and just writing, podcasts, radio, broadcasting, any of that stuff. I'm just really happy to be a part of it, and definitely a pleasure to be here with you guys tonight talking some draft. It definitely is a fun time to cover the Saints, be a Saints fan, for sure.
Well, I've had the opportunity to work with these guys. I can't believe we're coming up on a calendar year since you guys joined us as interns. And I was in your shoes, right? Just a few years ago interning with Saints News Network. And it's been a great ride for me to move from the internship all the way up to a writer and being able to kind of walk you guys through some things that maybe I went through, or some things that we're kind of going through together on a new journey, or fairly new journey, being associated with Fan Nation and SI.com. So these are awesome interns. Sam had brought up that both these guys have written articles about the draft over the last few days. So we'll start with Sam once again. Sam, without giving away the article, because we definitely want people to be reading that at www.saints.media. What was the article? Why was it important for Saints fans to read and understand the philosophies and the thought process you have heading into Thursday's draft?
Yeah, sure. The article I just recently wrote called "A Retool, Not a Rebuild." Without giving away too much, just detailing the philosophy that the Saints could go into the draft with. Not necessarily taking a step back this year, but just doubling down on filling some holes and moving forward in the future.
Then you have Andrew. You just wrote an article as well, except you used a little bit of analytics to tell Saints fans about a few different defensive back prospects here in the draft, and maybe a couple guys they should really keep their eyes on going into Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fun to look at these cornerbacks, and as Sam said, it's a retool, not a rebuild, and cornerback is one of those areas where the Saints obviously have to fill a hole with Janoris Jenkins leaving, and then you have the whole thing with Marshawn Lattimore, and that, right now it's a little, just with the legal trouble and everything, a little, shaky right now. I mean, we'll just have to see, and cornerback in the first round, whatever it may be, will be really important for the Saints if they're going to be successful in 2021. And just looking at a few guys like Greg Newsome, Caleb Farley, Asante Samuel Jr., and just looking at their analytics, a lot of fun stuff, passer rating, stuff like that. It is, really fun to look at that type of stuff. And you see trends like, how can these guys be successful in the NFL? How can they be successful with the Saints? And definitely check that out if you want to see more with that. And it was definitely really fun, diving into those analytics.
Well, both of you said it. It feels more like a retool or a reload than a rebuild. But before we got on the podcast, we were talking, this is kind of an odd year to be a Saints fan or just be a guy in New Orleans, because I think when you look back over the last we could even go back the last 10 years with the Saints, you've had these pockets of space where the Saints were real Super Bowl contenders. You look at 10, 11. And then you go through 12, 13, 14, 15, and in the 16, it was a team that was toying. Well, maybe they could make the playoffs. Maybe they could squeak out a division title. And obviously in 2013, they were able to do that. But it was a lot of questionable years there in the middle. And then you have the fantastic 2017 draft class. And since then, it seems like the Saints have been true Super Bowl contenders through and through. But now the end of the Drew Brees era is upon us, and I think if you ask anybody in the Who Dat Nation 4 years ago, 5 years ago, what would the status of the New Orleans Saints be upon Drew Brees' retirement, they'd easily tell you a rebuild. But the Saints might be caught in the middle a little bit here, because still a very talented roster, obviously with escaping cap hell, if you will. They had to release a few veteran free agents that you might not wanted to have to see leave New Orleans, but still a talented roster. You got a quarterback competition coming up, and I'm a big fan of Jameis Winston. So, Sam, how do you see the New Orleans Saints kind of fitting into this middle ground, and could they be a Super Bowl contender depending on what they do starting on Thursday?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why the Saints can't be a playoff team next year. They still have a lot of the main core pieces in place. I think whoever the quarterback will be, maybe Jameis Winston, I think he's more than capable of leading the team to a playoff spot. With that being said, there are some more holes on the team that the Saints need to fill. Guys like Janoris Jenkins, Emmanuel Sanders, Trey Hendricks, and guys that they lost. I think this is a good draft to address some of those positions and take the first step going into the future.
Well, and Andrew, Sam just talked about a couple positions that the Saints, lost in places they have to fill, whether that's Janoris Jenkins, whether that's Emmanuel Sanders. And I think a lot of Saints fans have already forgotten about Trey Hendrickson, who had a fantastic year last year and signed a massive deal to go to the Cincinnati Bengals. Out of those three spots, which do you feel is the most necessary to fill?
For me, it's cornerback, just because I think all of us have seen, if you have a bad cornerback, you can get targeted and targeted and targeted. We've seen it when the Saints didn't have like a Marshawn Lattimore, even opposite him. Then we even saw it with Marshawn Lattimore. People would still target the likes of Eli Apple, Ken Crawley, whoever it may be. And that was, the big issue. Everyone gets so upset about that because they should when you see the 50-yard passes downfield, and those will just kill you in a game. And having, a solidified second corner, and we saw it this year last year, I should say, with Janoris Jenkins, and it was just such a breath of fresh air. It helped his defense so much. And look, wide receiver is big. Edge rusher is really big. And just like I feel like in those areas, I think you have players already, though, to step in if need be. Like right now, I feel like when you're looking at the receivers, I love Traquan Smith. I think that he can step in, as well as guys like Deontay Harris and Marquez Callaway. I think they have enough there. And then Michael Thomas, I think we have to talk about him because he's going to me, ascend. Because last year was just, a forgettable year for him. He probably won't hit that 2019 status, but if he hits the 2018 where he was still a great receiver, 2017 he was amazing too. Like, he may not have to hit the record-breaking level, but to me right now, like, I think the Saints will be fine at receiver. And then defensive line to me is shaky. I think you're going to need guys to step up. You gave 2 firsts for Marcus Davenport, and eventually he's going to have to step up, and you kind of have to now, like, it's his time to shine. Like, you kind of have to let that in. You have Carl Granderson as well, and when looking at cornerback, no disrespect to P-Rob and Patrick Robinson, but I think that's the hole that you would want to fill, whether it's through the draft, free agency, probably a little of both, if it was best case scenario. And that's kind of where I'm looking at, those three holes and kind of how to fill them. I think cornerback in just today's pass happy NFL, you need two solid corners, and the Saints had it last year. Now they're going to, look to find it, whether it's draft or maybe late in free agency.
Well, how do you guys feel right here? Jerry says going defensive back at the corner number 2 spot, or maybe finding a linebacker. That's something we haven't really talked about, is having to fill a big hole alongside Demario Davis after Quan Alexander's Achilles injury, and then Alex Anzalone very publicly saying that made him feel like he was unwanted in New Orleans, and he goes and follows Dan Campbell up to Detroit. So are there a couple prospects at the linebacker position that the two of you really like, Sam?
Yeah, so I think this is a good year to need a cornerback or linebacker. There's a lot of really good players that you can draft. Obviously, on the higher end, you have guys like J.C. Horn, but also Greg Newsome could be a candidate that the Saints trade up for in the first round. For the linebacker position, you have guys like Jamin Davis, Jabril Cox in the later rounds, Zaven Collins. So I think all these guys are really solid, and especially the linebackers are pretty athletic in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think cornerback and linebacker are the two positions you got to go get. And I think right now, linebacker, I mean, I've been a big fan of Zaven Collins throughout this whole draft prospects. And you just look at his size, it's like 260 or 250, whatever he ends up being, and he could still run like a 4.6. And the Saints love big, bulky, like 1990 style linebackers for some reason. And we'll see if that changes. Maybe they see, a team like Tampa Bay have a lot of success with the young, speedy guys, with a guy like Devin White. But, I mean, he's a guy that I think really fits that Saints mold. And I think coming in, he would fit nicely with Demario Davis. And then, JOK as well, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. I think I said that correctly. And he's from Notre Dame. And if he falls a little bit, he's like that Derwin James type, safety linebacker, can do a little bit of everything. And that would be more of like the Quan Alexander route. Let's get someone fast with Demario Davis. And that would be something that would, I think, be amazing to see, because we saw what Quan Alexander brought to the Saints defense. And I think Koramoah can actually do more than Quan Alexander. So that, to me, if he would fall to the Saints, I think that would be a really good get. And then, cornerback, Sam, you said it. Greg Newsome, I think, is one of those guys where you may have to trade up to get, but, a solidified guy. I think he's a plug-and-play starter. Caleb Farley, I really love. And I think if it wasn't for the back injuries, he would be picked in the top 10. I mean, I really do believe that. His technique's great. His ball skills are great. Can play both man and zone. And all it is those back injuries, and those back injuries could be a killer for him, which is something, the medicals have to work itself out. But, I mean, if he would fall to the Saints because of injuries, I honestly think he'd be one of, those top guys.
Well, how about JOK for a second, right? That guy, and I know you're more of the analytic guy, Andrew, but I believe it was Pro Football Focus that came out, and he was ranked like second in pass coverage.
He's insane.
And he's a linebacker. So it's quite interesting. One linebacker that didn't really come up in that conversation was Cox out of LSU, a guy that was spotted working out with some Saints coaches this week. How do we feel about Jabril Cox?
I mean, I'll start with Cox. I mean, I think he's a guy. I think he's getting a lot of hype into the first round. I'm not so sure there. I think he'd be a great second round pick. Like, let's say the Saints went corner round 1 and he was there at pick 60, or maybe you have to move up a few spots to get him. I think that would be a really solid pick. I mean, he used to play at North Dakota State and then only came to LSU for 1 year. And that's where I kind of feel, you want more than 1 year at SEC level starting experience to be drafted in the first round. When, you look at the other linebackers like JOK or Zaven Collins, they, to me, show a little bit more. I mean, even like a guy like Jamin Davis, if he was still available. But I think Cox is, a solid player, and he had a great year at LSU when the defense wasn't very good. The measurables are there. It's going to be interesting, to see. I believe he had his pro day today, or I didn't see the stats there, but it'll be interesting to see how he measures out. I know the Saints do care about that, how players measure out their pro days or combines in normal years, but I think he'd be a good second round guy. First round, I think, would be a bit of a reach. And, with all the other linebackers and cornerbacks there, I'd probably stay away from that. But I think really solid second round prospect.
And Sam, how much do you think it matters if you're playing at the FBS level or the FCS level. For a guy like Cox, who spent 3 years at a smaller school, and I'm a little surprised to hear you say that, Andrew, knowing you're at a small school yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, you need a little bit more.
There's no football prospects coming from high school.
That is true. That is true. I covered an FCS team for a long time, so I've seen a couple come through. But Sam, how important is it to really get some of that as close as you can NFL experience there in the SEC? And do you think that's going to affect his draft status at all?
I think it is pretty important to have that level of experience. Playing in the SEC, you're playing against a lot of other future NFL players. So I think that really does matter. I think Jabril Cox would be a really nice player for the Saints to draft in the second or maybe third round. I don't think his play at North Dakota State will affect him too much. Like Andrew said, he had a pretty good year at LSU on a pretty bad team. So I think it'll balance out, but the experience in the SEC definitely matters.
Well, let's not forget North Dakota State, a monster at the FCS level, a team that a lot of people have asked to see move up to the FBS because they've been that dominant at the FCS level. So there is a jump, but I'm convinced that there isn't as big of a jump as people might think. I see Jason, hey, hope you're doing all right. Brian Russell says Cox is a third-round talent. I don't know how I feel about that, but I do think he'll be there at 60 if the Saints decide to stay where they're at and not trade up. We've talked about it a little bit, guys. Before we get into some of your favorite prospects, let's kind of hit this one out of the park. There's a lot of talk the Saints could trade up, right? It's the first time since 2017 that they have at least 7 draft picks, and it's the most draft picks they've had in a draft since 2015. So could they trade up? And if they were to trade up, right on cue from our friend Jason Williams, what's the higher priority if they do trade up? Is it going to be linebacker? Is it going to be corner? We talked about that a little. I think I know the direction you guys are going to answer that question. But starting with Sam, do you see the Saints trading up in this draft? And if they were to trade up, who's the guy that you target?
It wouldn't surprise me if the Saints trade up in the first round. If they do in the first round, I think it would likely be for a cornerback, maybe either J.C. Horn or Greg Newsome. But I also wouldn't be very surprised if they just stay at 28 in the first round and instead maybe trade up in the second or third rounds. I think there's a lot better depth to be had in the later rounds this year, and they had the picks. It's a lot easier to trade up in the later rounds in the first round. So I think, but if you do trade in the first round, it should probably be for a cornerback.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Sam, because last year, let's go back to the 2020 draft. Obviously, the Saints take Cesar Ruiz in the first round, but they made 2 trades on day 2, and that was to get Zach Bond and then trade back in the third round for Adam Troutman. So, Andrew, do you think it's more likely that the Saints perhaps use some of those third-round picks to maybe jump back into the second round if a first-round talent falls in a position that they like?
Yeah, I mean, Brendan, we talked about it actually when you came on the Who Dat discussion, and you were talking about Asante Samuel. If he fell into the second round, and he was around pick 50, would you go up and trade him? Let's say you get a linebacker in the first round, and you still have that big hole at cornerback. Would you go trade up for a cornerback? And I thought that would be a great idea. Or maybe it's not Samuel and it's someone else the Saints love. Maybe it would be like a guy like Jabril Cox or something like that. Maybe you have to go up a little higher to get him in the second round. I'd really like that because I think second round, obviously you don't have as much elite talent as you do in the first round. And, let's say you see someone falling down the boards. Let's say you have someone graded, your top 25 and he's fell to 45. Maybe you then go trade a second or a third, whatever it ends up being. And the Saints have done that a lot. They did that with Alvin Kamara. They did that with Eric McCoy. So I think everyone talks about DeMarcus Davenport in the first round, but they do it a lot in those later rounds as well. They did it last year to get Adam Troutman and then also Zach Bond in the third round. So, to me, that's kind of where they are with the trading. I think it's probably more likely to happen in those rounds. And, I almost feel like they're probably not because Mickey Loomis, I don't think he's scared of anything, but you'd have to be shaking your head a little bit after that Marcus Davenport and just how that hasn't panned out. And it set that position back. I mean, there's really no other way to say that. If Davenport doesn't really, pan out, the Saints are, behind the 8 ball at defensive line. And that's an issue going forward, especially with all the other holes. But I mean, it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And just one more thing, I looked up the Jabril Cox. His pro day was today. He ran a 4.54 40-yard dash. Vertical was 34, and he measured in at 6'3" and 233 pounds, which is right where the Saints like their linebackers, and that, not too small. And, Cox isn't too big, but he's kind of that perfect size. So I wanted to add that as well.
How about this one while we're on the topic? Before we move on to some of your favorite prospects, can you guys see the Saints packaging both thirds for an extra second-round pick? Personally, I think that could definitely come into play, and I'll kind of piggyback off of Andrew there, is if there's a guy that's on your board and he's top 30 on your board and he falls to 45, 50, and it really fills a need, I could definitely see the Saints do that. I don't see why not. I think a lot of it has to do with who they take in the first round as well. I mean, obviously, if you go cornerback in the first round and then you see a corner kind of slide that you like, I don't really think the Saints are going to double down at defensive back in the first and the second round, especially giving up some picks in the third. But we haven't talked about the receiver position. Obviously, a hole for the New Orleans Saints. If there's a receiver that they really like that starts to slip, I could definitely see that, but they would have to really love them. But let's remember, there is a player in every single draft that Sean Payton just falls in love with, and they go get. Obviously, Davenport was that guy a couple years ago. I do think 40 times are a little overrated as well. Jason, I think
people love him though.
I know people love him, but I think it's how explosive can you be in a small space. I like the 3-cone a little bit better because it shows how explosive you can be in small spaces, especially for a linebacker spot. I mean, hitting those A gaps, B gaps, stuffing the run, and Demario Davis, one of the best in football in blitzing through those A gaps. I think that's really important too. How fast can you be in some small spaces? Brian Russell says Tony or the kid from Ole Miss for receiver. Yeah, those are some guys I could definitely see falling into the second round that the Saints could definitely use those thirds to package and trade up for. But like I said, it's about who they love and how do they feel about the receivers on the roster. I think a lot of people forget. Obviously, a lot of people want to talk about Marquez Callaway because he had such a good year as an undrafted free agent. But Deontay Harris was starting to be used a little bit more as a receiver before his neck injury. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing. Obviously, he's not a 2 receiver. He's more of a slot guy. He's going to be your number 3 guy. But the more that you can kind of move him around and toy, there's going to be matchups there. And I don't know if it's a great comparison, but I like to look at his size and what he can do and where you can line him up on the field and say, think about a guy like Darren Sproles and the matchup nightmares that he created. And it opened up space for a guy like Jimmy Graham. So is Deontay Harris going to be a guy that opens up space for a guy like Mike Thomas? And if you can line up Harris and Kamara both in the slots, and how are defenses going to match up? So that's going to be the big thing. And how do the Saints feel about those guys in that room? I think Callaway's going to be good for us as well. Brian and Jason, it's going to definitely be one of those 3 positions. Those are the biggest needs, the cornerback, the linebacker, and the receiver. So with that being said, while you guys are here, definitely want to talk to you guys about some of your favorite prospects going into Thursday. It is like I said, it's a weird draft for New Orleans because you have some immediate needs, but you also feel like you still have a little bit of a window here to potentially win a Super Bowl. And let's be honest, guys, you go back to that divisional round game, and I know I'm just opening up wounds at this point, but the turning point of that game was the fumble by Jared Cook. And if the Saints go down and score, they're up by 2 scores at home. And I really think the Saints would have had a chance to go into Green Bay and pull off an upset at Lambeau. I was that confident about the team, even with Drew Brees not being 100%, right? So you're still in this weird window. Jameis Winston potentially brings you a whole new wrinkle to your offense. And for the most part, outside of a couple pieces here and there, and they're big pieces, don't get me wrong, the defense is still intact for the most part. So who are you guys looking at for the Saints to take in rounds 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, I mean, Brendan, I first want to talk about that divisional game and you brought it up, but I really felt like this Saints roster was really one of the best. And you talk about this year's roster is going to get worse, but probably just looking all around, the Saints roster in 2020 was the best in the NFL, and you couldn't got much better. I mean, just looking around, I mean, yes, were there holes, but every team has holes. I mean, Tampa Bay had holes. Their whole secondary, like everyone was saying how it was shoddy going into the playoffs and it wasn't going to be good. And, it ended up holding up and they did really good. And that front seven carried them. And, now that the Saints, they're going to probably just overall roster wise, it's really going to be impossible for them to get up to that level again. But, you're definitely still in this window of playoffs and, we'll see what happens. And I think it's going to be a nice tryout period for a guy like Jameis Winston or, Taysom Hill. And that's why, you have to fill some holes here in the draft. And for me, first round, just looking at, it's really cornerback and linebacker. I think those are my two areas for the Saints. And, you could add receiver in there as well. But really for me, if Caleb Farley fell, he's that first round guy that I really like. Yes, the injury is there, the back injury is there, but if he gets cleared, the talent that, watching the tape, the numbers, everything, it's undeniable that he can be, a top 10 corner, in this, or top 10 player in this draft and like a top 2 corner. And that's something that's really enticing when you already have a guy like Marshawn Lattimore. And, if you put Farley, with him, I think you have a really good cornerback duo, maybe even better than what you had last year with Janoris Jenkins if everyone's healthy. So he'd be, one of my guys in the first round. And then linebacker, if JOK fell, I think you'd have to pull the trigger. It would be interesting. I don't think it would happen, but if Farley and JOK were together, who would the Saints pick? I'd probably go cornerback because I think that's the bigger need. But, really those two guys, we talked about JOK before, but first round, I think you got to go defense. And those are the two guys. If they fell to 28, I'd really be throwing a party.
Well, Brian, the 2017 draft class, I know the Saints, you look back at 06 and 17, those are two of the greatest draft classes of all time, but the rarity of the hit like that can be extremely difficult. You're lucky to get.
They hit on every pick. Let's be real. They hit on every pick. That doesn't happen.
And look at 06, right? 06 with the Saints. Ninkovich was like a 6th round pick that year. Didn't even make the roster in New Orleans, but ends up having a great career.
Pro Bowl career.
Those are two drafts that Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton showed that they can really evaluate talent. I think Jeff Ireland, though he wasn't on, those either. He's right up there as one of the best evaluators in football, but it is extremely hard to hit like the Saints did in 2017. That was a really special year. And honestly, you can look at 2018 and the no call and everything that happened that year. But I really think 2017 was a more special team than the 2018 team was. And that's just because I don't think any of us saw that coming. I hope the Saints knock it out in the draft this year like they did in 2017, but it's extremely rare. So, Sam, I'm going to ask you the same question that Andrew just answered. Some of your favorite prospects this year, guys that you feel can make an immediate impact for the Saints, and how do you go into this draft? You're the guy who wrote this article about the retool. And like I said earlier in the show, guys, check it out, www.saints.media, to read both Andrew and Sam's articles about the draft. Andrew, there we go. Andrew wrote about 3 defensive backs from an analytical standpoint the Saints should look at. And then we have Sam over here who said it is a retool, not a rebuild in this draft. So check those articles out. But Sam, I'll let you take the floor. Why is it a retool, and who are you retooling with?
Yeah, so first I agree with Andrew. I think defense needs to be the priority in this draft. I would love to get a guy like J.C. Horn or Greg Newsome, but I think Horn's going to be probably too far out of reach to trade up for. Greg Newsome would probably be more likely to trade up for, but even still, you have to not give up too many future picks, just in case, worst case scenario happens and Jameis or Taysom doesn't pan out, and you actually do have to rebuild in the future. So you shouldn't give up too much in the first round, but also, I would love a guy like JOK. I think that would be a perfect fit for the Saints. You can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You got a linebacker, and you also have some of his coverage ability. And you also have other linebackers like Jamin Davis and Jabril Cox, and who could be really helpful. Asante Samuel in the second round too. There's really not a lot of guys that I wouldn't like the Saints to draft. I think, they could find help they could find some really good help in the first 3 rounds. On the offensive side, I really love Rashad Bateman, but I think, earliest you might have to trade up into the late teens, early 20s to get him, or if he falls into the second round, you'll probably have to trade up into the early second round to get him. But again, I think defense should be the priority. Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis have done a really good job of finding late round talent on offense as well as undrafted free agents. So I'm not too worried about the offensive side in the draft. But again, you got to go either cornerback or linebacker, and I think this is a really good draft for that.
Here's an excellent question. What are you willing to give up to jump up in this draft? This obviously comes from us, and we're kind of just probing our way along into the show. But what is too much? What is too much for the Saints to give up? Before we started the show, we talked about just the 3 of us in a private conversation that you look back at that Davenport and say, can the Saints afford to go that far again and give up essentially 2 first-round draft picks to get a guy? Personally, I think the sweet spot is about 20. If there's a guy you really like that falls to 20, I think moving up 8 spots is a little bit more reasonable than trading up and giving up something crazy. Here's our very own. We're hoping he'd come on and join. I know he's not able to join us via video, but there's Joe, one of our interns, one of our 3 great guys that work behind the scenes. Like I said at the beginning of the show, just trying to give these guys a little bit of a spotlight. We'll definitely be doing a little bit of more of these intern podcasts. But Joe says he'd love to see them move up and grab Horn. But both those guys right there, I think, are guys that are going to be gone around 15 to 17. I think both those guys are going to be off the board. Jason here says, do not trade first round.
I agree with him.
I'm 100% with you. 100% with you on that one. So what is too much? Where do you guys feel the sweet spot is? I said the sweet spot's about 20. I think trading up about 8 picks and maybe giving up your second round pick and retaining the thirds, or trading the 2 thirds and retaining your second, is about as much as I'm willing to give up. But a guy you absolutely love has to be there at 20 that you feel isn't going to drop those last 8 spots. Starting with you, Sam, what is too much for the Saints to give up here in this draft?
Yeah, I think giving up next year's first-round pick is definitely too much. I don't think the Saints should wager their future like that at this point. I think, like you said, Brendan, 20 is probably the sweet spot. You could package your first, second, and third round pick to move up into there. I think that would be good. If you're looking to move up into the second round, I think packaging your 2 third-round picks and some later picks could probably do the trick too. But again, the Saints shouldn't really be looking to give up too many future picks to move up.
I mean, for me, it's
a question for you, Andrew. What is a good trade partner for the Saints? We kind of said 20 is not a sweet spot. You're the guy in New York. Are the Jets a good trade partner at 23?
I think it would depend. I think the Jets, they will. I think I could see them moving back because they need everything, and if they can pick up another second, whatever it ended up being, maybe another second, maybe next year's second. To me, I think they're a team that would always need more picks because they need to fill basically every position on the roster. Which, just the situation that they're in right now, and maybe they could be, that team. I think that they do want a cornerback, which. Then moving with the Saints, who most likely also want a cornerback, would be something that maybe wouldn't happen. I think, there are a few teams that, for the Saints, I'm just looking in that 20 range. I could see it happen. But at the end of the day, I feel like if they give enough, up in capital, they're going to be able to do it. I believe that Davenport trade was with the Packers, which, they're not the Saints rivals, but they're definitely one of those top teams in the NFC. And, they were able to get that done. And I think when trades at the end of the day, no interdivision, but if it's not interdivision and it's a fair trade that both sides see fit, I could really see it being anybody. For me, just looking in the first round and that draft, I probably wouldn't even, trade eight slots up. It's just, at the end of the day, I think this team needs all their draft picks. I think they need young, cheap talent. I wouldn't want to give up my second round pick because I think that's valuable. We talked about it earlier, but packaging those 2/3 and moving up to get 2 second round picks, I would really like that. So that would be something that, if that would be possible, I would say, if some team wants to go after that, if you can get 2 seconds and a first, you can possibly get 3 impact guys right away. And the Saints really, that sweet spot for them is that second and third rounds. They've really hit on a lot of guys in that area, maybe even more than the first round, which is kind of interesting. But first round, just moving up at all those spots, or maybe they'd give up next year's picks. The way this team is and the holes they need to fill and the cap situation they're in, I just want, young talent. And, maybe at 23, you can get Greg Newsome, but at 28, you can get a guy like Zaven Collins and JOK. And I think they can both impact this team in very similar ways, and they're both great players. So that's just kind of where I am with trading. I think this year is different than years past, where maybe you had one need and there was one player specific and you wanted to trade up for him. This year is just not like that. You need more players, need more young talent. And that's just kind of with trading, I'm just a little wary on for this draft.
Well, both Brian and Jason kind of hit on good points, and that was we don't really know what's up with Marshawn Lattimore and the situation that happened in Cleveland. Defensive back is probably the biggest position of need, but they both talked about potentially signing one in free agency. And Andrew, I know you and I talked about it on the podcast last time that I was on. And I know Tristan did on the podcast as well. And I do want to touch on that just for a second. For some of you that don't know, we had an intern with us named Tristan Ederson, local from New Orleans, who tragically passed away very suddenly just a few weeks ago. So please continue to keep his family in your prayers. He was 24 years old. Really tough stuff for us, and a friend and a guy that had just joined our family just a few months ago. But he had also talked about on the Who Dat Discussion podcast with Andrew the possibility of bringing a guy like Richard Sherman in. Man, Tristan was huge on the Saints bringing in Josh Norman, and I could definitely get behind that, especially with the history that Josh Norman has with Sean Payton. Remember, before he went to Washington while he was with Carolina, there was a big push by the Saints to sign Josh Norman. So I could definitely see that be a possibility. But I think the dream scenario for me would be the Saints go draft a young guy in the first round and then go get another veteran to kind of teach him. This isn't going to be a case where the Saints bring in a guy like Champ Bailey and it's like, oh, he's going to start, and all of a sudden he gets cut. This is definitely going to be a chance for a veteran to come in and play some of the twilight of his career, but also give a chance to coach up a young guy. Brian, thank you for that message. It was crazy to hear that news just a few weeks ago. But yeah, I think that's the dream scenario for the Saints. Sam, how do you feel about the Saints not just drafting a DB, but potentially bringing in a veteran as well?
Yeah, I think DB is definitely in position the Saints are going to address in the draft. There are still a couple guys they could sign in free agency too. I know a big one would probably be Richard Sherman. It's probably going to be a combination of the two. They're going to draft and they're going to sign people in free agency. I think the safer bet would be drafting, because you'll have guys more, I guess, on your timeline that can grow with the team. They're cheaper, and I think there's a lot of nice DBs in this draft.
Well, and Andrew, this is an interesting situation where you have the former Legion of Boom coach and ties with Richard Sherman. Now, Richard Sherman's not the same guy, but man, he's a guy that still has a lot of heart for the game, a lot of energy, and one of the most interesting things to me, he represents himself. He doesn't have an agent. We kind of talked about it when I was on your podcast. This is a weird year for free agents because of the salary, right? Because of the salary cap. You're going to have guys that were in that $3 to $5 million a year range that are still on the market and could very well be signing veteran minimums simply because there's just not enough cap space.
Yeah, it's interesting when looking at there's still a lot of, especially cornerback. Other positions too, but I think cornerback's the big one. And I think everyone talks about Richard Sherman because he had interest with the Saints and the ties are already there. But even beyond that, Josh Norman could be another guy. I'd be surprised if Sherman came in. Let's say the Saints drafted a guy like Newsome or maybe even Asante Samuel Jr. I'd be surprised if Sherman would come if he wasn't guaranteed a starting job, which, for him, you can't fault him for that. I think you may have to go another veteran that doesn't have the pedigree of Sherman, because Sherman, when he was healthy, he was, at the top of his game just 2 years ago when the 49ers made their Super Bowl run. That's something that when looking at that area, I just highly doubt that he would take a job that he wasn't the surefire starter, or at least, like, let's say the Saints drafted a 3rd round pick. That's a lot different than, picking Greg Newsome at 28 or 23, whatever it ends up being, or Caleb Farley or another guy. It's just, I think with Sherman, if you could pair him with a 3rd round guy, a 2nd round guy, or maybe it's Josh Norman, maybe I believe Hayward's still out there who used to be on the Chargers. I'm just trying to pull it up now, but I would love for the Saints, for all their holes, if you can bring in a rookie and then bring in a veteran with them and hedge your bets the way you want to, that would be a way to not only, have, solid starters, but also have that veteran depth as well, or young depth. And that's something that you obviously want to achieve on the roster. And that, when looking at these Saints teams of the past, it's all been depth. That's how they've been able to build, what they've been able to build over the last 4 years now. And, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out and who they're able to get. And I don't think it's just cornerback. I think linebacker, when you're looking at a guy like Quan Alexander, who's still out there, and I know the injuries is there, and obviously he's familiar with the Saints. I think him, wide receiver can be an area as well. Golden Tate's still out there if the Saints would need a slot receiver, and the list goes on. And I could definitely see the Saints trying to hedge their bets with some veterans, some rookies, and trying to basically create a roster with, you're obviously under the salary cap, and it's a really a championship pedigree one.
Well, guys, before we start wrapping up the show, I want to give you guys an opportunity to drop any final questions you have for me or the interns. Before we go any further, can we just give a round of applause? These interns, are doing a great job on their debut show with us at the Saints News Network. Some great stuff. I want to throw this back up. Tristan's family is establishing a scholarship in his name, which is awesome. Like I said, Tristan was a great guy, aspiring journalist, and had a really bright future ahead of him. So if you guys want to donate anything, I'm going to leave this link up for a little bit. That's the GoFundMe. The family could definitely use anything you could give, then obviously for the scholarship funds as well. So I'll just leave that up for a second as we get some any final thoughts and questions. But before we go into that, guys, let's just talk about it. The dream scenario for the New Orleans Saints in the draft, in your guys' eyes. Obviously, for me, I'm a writer. I'm not in the front office, and there's a reason for that. For you guys are just the interns. You're not sitting there. You're not Mickey Loomis. You're not Jeff Ireland. You're not Sean Payton. You're not making those decisions. But starting with you, Sam, if you could play this thing out exactly how you want to, who do the Saints take? What happens on Thursday, and why?
Yeah, I think the dream scenario would probably be Greg Newsome or JOK kind of falling into the early 20s. And I feel like the Saints are going to have to trade up to get either one of them. And perfect scenario would be they don't have to give up too much to trade for those two players. Then maybe in the 2nd, 3rd round, you could get maybe a guy like Jamin Davis or Jabril Cox. So definitely one of the top corners and linebackers, and I think that would be a really good start to the draft.
Andrew, dream scenario.
Yeah, I kind of have to echo that. I guess my ultimate pipe dream scenario is somehow like Justin Fields falls to like 15 and the Saints. I would give up 1st-round picks for him because I think he's the real deal. And for some reason, the 49ers don't believe that, or it doesn't seem according to their reports. But that would be my pipe dream scenario. But, kind of the regular dream scenario would be trying to get a cornerback at 28. Sam, you talked about it with guys like Greg Newsome or whoever it may be. But, Caleb Farley would probably be my number one. And I think he may fall a little further. Maybe you still have to trade up to get him. But, if he falls, he's a guy that I think could really be, with Marshawn Lattimore, that's going to be, a dynamic duo. And then if a linebacker can fall that you can plug and play with Demario Davis, you filled a lot of your holes really on defense right there. Maybe in the third round, you can get a receiver, maybe a guy like St. Brown. I think Amara St. Brown from USC. Maybe he falls, and you can get a speedster downfield as well. And, something like that. Maybe a guy like Cornell Powell from Clemson, another kind of, slot type receiver that's quick in space. So I think between those, you can kind of fill as many holes as possible, I kind of want to say. And I think they could do that. Now, I think worst case would be like, if you see Newsome, Farley, everyone goes off the board, JOK go off the board, and then, you have Zaven Collins falling off the board, and you're stuck with, like, I feel like how the Saints were last year at 24, and they have to pick an offensive lineman again, which, it wouldn't be the worst thing, but that's, I think, the worst compared to, I think, best if they have some of those defensive skill players follow them.
I think the dream scenario for me is having one of those DBs fall into your lap at 28, not having to trade up, right? I think the biggest
thing possible.
Biggest thing with Farley and Newsome as of late has been the injury history, and there's been plenty of talk and reports on how difficult it is this year because no combine, the pro days, just kind of COVID in the world as we know it. Being able to get accurate information on physicals and some of that stuff can be extremely difficult. So some teams might be worrisome and some guys may fall. And I think that one of those DBs could certainly fall to 28 for the Saints. Obviously, the nightmare scenario is that you rely on that and that doesn't happen. And then, like Andrew said, you're stuck and you got to make a pick. So for me, that's the dream scenario. And then you go into the second round and you're able to pick up a guy. And I'll echo the same thing you guys did. A guy like Jamin Davis, a guy like Jabril Cox. And you knock out two really big holes in the first two rounds, and you enter the third round, and you could really take best available. We haven't really talked about the interior of the defensive line. That's a spot the Saints still need to address. And then Malcolm Jenkins isn't getting any younger. I think he's going to be 34 this year, so maybe getting another safety. I know everybody loves Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, but I love where he is kind of being a nickel guy, opposed to being a true strong safety. So those are some positions the Saints could certainly address in the third round if you're able to knock out linebacker and defensive back in the first two. So I think those are going to be some big things. Got a couple from Brian before we wrap up the show. Do you think the Saints will take a QB in the later rounds? We'll just do a little lightning thing real quick. You guys think the Saints will take a QB in the later rounds, Sam?
Maybe if the guy like Kellen Mond's in the fourth round, probably. I could see that happening, but I don't really think so.
I say yes. I think the Saints should be in the quarterback business until, I think Sean Payton calls it that, the quarterback business, until they have their quarterback. And if that means a third-round pick on a guy, maybe like that 105 pick on a guy like Kyle Trask, Kellen Mond, fourth-round pick. Davis Mills is another guy that's kind of rising up draft boards from Stanford. And to me, that wouldn't hurt because, as much as I think, I think I'd have a lot of faith in Jameis Winston. I even have, some faith in Taysom Hill. They're not, definitely Drew Brees, sure. They're not at that level yet, not even close, really, in my opinion. And until you get to somewhere near there, you got to be, looking at quarterbacks. And if that's a fourth-round pick, might as well just start throwing darts at the wall. I feel like teams do that. The Cowboys did it with Dak Prescott. It ended up working out. Other teams have done it. Russell Wilson with the Seahawks. It ended up working out. So, sometimes, obviously, it doesn't. Most of the times it doesn't. But that one time, if you can get it, that would be, I think, what you have to do.
I really like the kid from Texas.
Allinger?
Yeah, I do. I think he has a bright future. Obviously, Texas disappointed over the last couple of years. I think he could be a good guy. And honestly, if you look at the history of Sean Payton with the Saints, they typically take a quarterback late or pick a guy up and undrafted free agent. Ryan,
shout out JT Barrett. Was up in the practice squad like 5 times.
He is one transaction away from setting the record for most transactions in Saints history. He's tied with Andy Tanner right now. So for all you guys who are going to run the Andy Tanner up and down receiver, man, I was rooting for him to make the team some of those years. Let's see what else we got before we go.
Jamie Newman as well. Yeah, forgot
that's
about
a good one. Let's see. Brian said Ross from Clemson is not bad either as a late round pick in terms of the receiver spots. So no, Clemson produces talent left and right. That wasn't 10 years ago, but Clemson, anybody you get from there, you get a really well-coached player. I think Dabo is one of the best coaches in college football. Obviously, his pay certainly reflects that. But I don't know. I don't think New Orleans, since Stephon Anthony's really gone Clemson.
Yeah.
So, and I know that was a name that nobody wanted to hear in terms of like draft night previews thing. All right, we'll wrap it up here. We'll go Jason's question, then we'll wrap up. How do we feel about the Tulane receiver
McClenskey that they picked?
How do we feel? He's lightning quick, if I'm not mistaken.
I was about to say, yeah, he's quick. He had that game-winning catch, I think, against Houston. If I'm not mistaken, a few years ago. I mean, I feel like, especially with wide receiver, the Saints have been good at getting that talent, and we'll see what he can end up bringing. I think you see what he can do in training camp, and I think you play it from there. I mean, that's kind of, I guess, what you feel about him. But I think when always local kids make the roster, I think everyone's definitely rooting for him, and we'll see what he can bring. Maybe also special teams as well, if he can add that dimension that may add to his worth on the roster as well.
Wide receivers are tricky, and you have to remember with the Saints team. I mean, we talked about a guy like Callaway, but how about guys like Lil Jordan Humphrey, Jawan Johnson, who was kind of forced in the lineup late last year, and Johnson's a huge guy in terms of just a frame. Honestly, on another 20 pounds, he could be a tight end. But no, I mean, there's a lot of guys on the Saints roster that could certainly make an impact at that receiver position. And they do that every year. I mean, one guy that I absolutely fell in love with, and I might be biased because we're from the same hometown of Neptune, New Jersey, but Keith Kirkwood. With the Panthers now, was a guy that kind of forced himself in the lineup and had a few moments with New Orleans. So the Saints are kind of just a revolving door at wide receiver. I mean, Austin Carr's been on the roster back and forth, and that's a guy that I've had a lot of faith in when they brought him up. I love Marquez Callaway. I think we all do. I think the only concern that I have about that, Jason, is that we all have a lot of faith and love for Marquez Callaway, and when you put that kind of belief into an undrafted free agent like that, the worst thing is you don't want to be disappointed. And as bad as this sounds, there's a reason you go undrafted. Now, sometimes there are diamonds in the rough, but I would hate for this guy to feel like there's so much pressure on him as a second year guy that only had 23 receptions last year to really step up and be that number 2 receiver. I think he can definitely progress, can definitely be a third, fourth option. And the Saints have been okay with it. Okay, Kyle, I see that. Yes, Marcus Colston. That's a diamond in the rough. That is the greatest player to never make a Pro Bowl, and I will argue that to the death, because that's some of those seasons were ridiculous. You're talking 1,200 yards, double-digit touchdowns, and can't make the Pro Bowl. Which
not in today's game.
In today's game, I mean, you have guys like Mike Thomas, who he's put up 9 a couple years, but there's a couple years stretch there where he couldn't get in the end zone double-digit times. That's even in a pass-happy league. So now Marcus Colston, greatest player to never make a Pro Bowl. There you go, Brian. I'm with you. Give him some time to progress. Let's not put super high expectations on him. Good expectation. He had a great first year. He stepped up huge when the Saints needed him. But let's not expect this guy to just kind of step into being a guy like even Emmanuel Sanders last year, who had 70-something catches. We can't put expectation on Marquez Callaway in year 2. So let's keep the faith high, but let's make sure the expectations don't get outrageous. But as we wrap up the show, Sam, how can the people follow you personally, follow some of your work with us, and what are some things that you're hoping to put out post NFL draft in terms of articles?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at _Sam Lucio _ it's LUCIO. But for articles after the draft, I think it'd be really fun to see who the Saints take and who they believe can have an impact on the team. I think it'll kind of be a wait and see, and we can do some profiles and see, maybe try to guess what roles the Saints are going to use them in the offense or defense, respectively. But I think it'll just be a fun time to see who they take.
And Andrew, where can they follow you, all of your info, and what you're doing with us moving forward?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Gullotta. So just, first, last name, pretty simple. And then you can follow the Who Dat Discussion podcast on Twitter at the Who Dat Dis. So should have a podcast up soon about the NFL draft as well. So that'll be fun. And then, post-draft, I mean, I feel like I'm the analytics nerd, and, trying to find some, new stats to talk about with this Saints team. And, for me, I think that just looking at maybe not only just draft, also some free agent guys, Passanio, who they got, I think could be an interesting guy looking at his analytics. I think, a few guys that I think trying to find some areas where the Saints can improve in, and maybe some guys they brought on the roster, maybe that, you wouldn't expect to improve, and maybe they will improve. That's kind of, I guess, my post-draft thing. So trying to dive a little deeper, into those areas.
And for myself, you can follow me on Twitter at BTBOYLAN. Yes, great shout out from Kyle. You'll be hearing more of these guys. We're going to bring you guys more of this podcast stuff. Obviously, we'll have Joe sometime in the near future, our third intern who kind of popped up in the chat for a little bit, but wasn't able to join us in terms of doing a video call this evening. You're going to hear a lot of these guys. These guys are super talented kids, and I'm really looking forward to what these guys can do. But yep, that's me, Brendan.
Shout out Brendan.
Follow me on Twitter at BTBOYLAN. You can do that on Instagram as well. Follow all of our work at www.saints.media. And just to close it out on a little bit of a personal note, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So find your local nonprofit, or nonprofit that I work with is Navigate Hope. They're doing a Run for Hope 5K virtually. So if you guys are into running, or you just want to help a good cause, hit those guys up at navhope.org, and you can sign up to do your virtual 5K from there. It's going to be a great event. And there you go. Tomorrow night, Kyle, Bob, and Mike DeTillier, one of the absolute best in New Orleans. He has an awesome draft knowledge, draft mind. I feel like we are just privileged to have him join us year in and year out. So make sure to follow the show tomorrow. Same place, same time. And Jerry, Brian, Jason, I feel like I'm missing somebody, but all the guys that joined us start to finish, we really appreciate you guys. We appreciate your support. We want to hear from you. So the more that we hear from you, the more that we know what you guys are looking for, what you want to hear, what you want to read. And again, thanks so much for joining us. See if I can get this right. That's Sam. That's Andrew. I'm Brendan. Kyle T. Mosley behind the scenes. Thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great night, and Who Dat?